and welcome to my channel. This is Ramakant Mahananda, Teacher to English, Kendriya Vidyalaya Barkoi. Dear students, today I am going to teach you a new story from the class 10th supplementary reader. The title of the story is A Trump of Surgery. The story has been written by Dr. James Harriet. In today's discussion, I will teach you the characters, the theme, and the summary of the story. So don't forget to watch the video till the end and to give your valuable suggestions in the comment box. So without any delay, let's get started. So dear students, let us begin the story. First of all, we shall discuss about the characterizations. The characters involved in the story will be discussed first. The first character that we find here is Mrs. Pumphrey. Let us know who Mrs. Pumphrey was. Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich and aristocrat lady. She had a pet dog. The dog was named Tricky. She loved Tricky very much, and she would overfeed and pamper the Tricky. She would give delicious food for her pet every day. She would often treat Tricky with brandy and wine also. The second character that we find here is Tricky. Tricky is a dog. It's the pet of Mrs. Pumphrey. Tricky loved his mistress very much. He simply ate and slept. He had no activity at all. He didn't take any kind of interest in playing and rolling over. Due to pampering and overfeeding, he looked like a blotted sausage. The third character, the most important character of this particular story, is Mr. Harriet. By the way, for your information, let me tell you that Mr. Harriet is the narrator as well as the author of this particular story. By profession, Mr. Harriet was a veterinary doctor in real life also. Here, it is written that in this particular story also, he has depicted the character of himself as a veterinary surgeon. He was an intelligent man. He knew that Mrs. Pumphrey's overcaring would be a problem for Tricky someday. He treated and helped Tricky to regain his lost health and activeness. He did not reveal the truth to Mrs. Pumphrey. And the truth was that Tricky regained or restored his health without any kind of medicines. The doctor had given no medicines to Tricky except controlling his diet. And that was the wonder that he did. Now you have understood the characters of the story well. So let us come to the theme. The theme is very simple. When you go through the story, you shall find that you have encountered many such incidences in your life. It's a very simple story, but it has a significant moral lesson for everyone. It depicts the consequences of pampering, overcaring, and overfeeding of a dog. This justifies that too much of anything is good for nothing. You must have heard about this particular phrase. Someone saying about it that too much of caring is not good. Too much of caring is not good for whether that is a student, that is your own son and daughter, that is your pet. It is not good for anyone. And that same phrase is being justified truly through this particular story. Now, let us discuss about the summary of the story. Dear students, I have tried to write this summary in very short format so that you can easily understand it, memorize it, and also make your notes accordingly. This would also help you during the examinations. If you do not have time to revise the chapter, if you do not have time to go through the text, no need to be worried about it. You simply go through the summary that I have provided in this particular video. Don't forget to take note of it. This would help you score very good number in your examination. So dear students, let us move into the summary of the story. Tricky was a pet dog. He was dearly loved by his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. Tricky was overfed and pampered. Tricky spent all his day on the bed. He was excessively fat.
He was very, very fat, too fat. I would say he was too fat, and because of his fatness, he took no interest in games and playing. He didn't come out of the house. He would simply spend his entire day on the sofa and the bed. This restricted his movement. He took no interest in going out or playing any games. On the other hand, his mistress continued to feed him with delicious food and added to the problem. When you go through the character of Mrs. Pumphrey, then you would find that Mrs. Pumphrey was an over-caring lady. She had everything. There was no shortage of anything in her life. And that's why she cared her dog a lot. We don't say simply caring, we would say that she was over caring her dog. And because of that, she would bring delicious food. If it is not needed for the dog even, then she would bring and give it to the food to eat. And because of that, because of pampering and overfeeding, the dog has become very, very fat. And because of that only, the dog doesn't take interest in playing and in physical activities. What happens after that? Once Mrs. Pumphrey found her dog sick and vomiting. She called Mr. Harriet, a veterinary doctor, to cure the dog. Mr. Harriet knew Tricky and his mistress well. Soon he understood the problem. Here comes the role of Mr. Harriet. For the first time he appears in the story here. What happens, but as soon the text suggests that Mr. Harriet, the doctor, the veterinary doctor, knew Mrs. Pumphrey and Tricky very well. I think he lived in their neighborhood, or Tricky might have been taken to his clinic many a times for vaccination or for some medication also. That's why he knew the condition of Tricky very well, and he believed that because of this over pampering and caring, someday Tricky would suffer. And the day have arrived. Mr. Harriet advised Lady to admit the dog immediately as his condition was getting worse. Initially, Mrs. Pumphrey was unwilling to send, but had no other way left except it. So when the doctor was called and the doctor came to the house for treatment of Tricky, he found that Tricky was not in a good condition. Soon he understood that the problem is with his fatness. It is only because of the overfeeding Tricky's health is not responding, and he advised the lady to get Tricky admitted for about 15 days or for about a fortnight in his surgery or in his clinic, so that he would be able to take care of Tricky properly and would be able to give the best treatment to Tricky. Now, the lady initially did not agree with the proposal. Since she was simply she was blind with the love of Tricky. She did not even want to spend a single day without Tricky. And she cried a lot. Even she started packing a lot of food items. She asked her maids and the helpers to give a lot of things to Tricky, so that those things can be carried to the hospital or to the nursery, so that Tricky can enjoy and have a beautiful stay in that particular nursery even. But she had no other way left for her. The doctor strictly advised that if she wants Tricky to recover, then she must admit Tricky in the hospital. So finally, the lady agreed. After getting the dog admitted in his nursery, Mr. Harriet provided no food for the first 2 days except water to drink. Now you see a doctor, what kind of medication he is going to provide to Tricky. Tricky is in a very bad condition. He is not eating anything. He is vomiting continuously. And he is not taking interest with the other animals also. He is not responding to them. If the dogs in the house of that particular nursery are coming and sniffing, and they are moving around him and trying to tempt him to come and play, but he shows no signs of interest. He's not at all interested in all those things because he knows that he can't move like them, he can't run and play like them. So Mr. Harriet, as he knew the problem very well, what the medication that he is going to start, the very first medication that he started was by cutting the diet. He did not provide anything to eat for the first 2 days. Simply, Tricky was provided with water to drink. After that, Mr. Harriet kept Tricky on a strict diet. Very controlled diet was given for Tricky for rest of the 13 days. But because the stay in the nursery is going to be of 15 days for a fortnight, he has asked the lady to admit the dog. For he knew it well, Tricky had no other disease. His obesity had been a problem for him. Tricky soon recovered and started rolling over, running and playing with the gang. Within few days, within 2 or 3 days of medication, when Tricky was not given food and started consuming the fat that he had accumulated, he had stored in his body, now he's feeling relaxed. Now he's feeling very much refreshed. Now he's feeling very much comfortable with the new shape that he is gaining day by day. There is recovery coming soon in his life. Now he started showing interest to play with other inmates. Inmates means the uh, people who were living in that particular house, the animals who were also living in that particular house along with Tricky. During these days, Mrs. Pumphrey was quite worried and she would visit the nursery with a lot of delicious food. But Mr. Harriet was a very clever man. He was an intelligent man, as I told you. He did not even give a single piece of egg or wine or anything to Tricky, which was brought by his mistress for him. Why? He knows that if he starts giving all those things to Tricky again, Tricky would never recover again. Tricky would again go back to the old stage. Tricky would again become fat. He would again show the negative signs. That's why Mr. Harriet knowingly avoided to give all those delicious food to Tricky, and what he did with those foods, that's quite funny. He enjoyed the food which was brought for Tricky with his partner every night. So he had a good time. He had a good feast with his partner for around 13 days. After a fortnight, when Mrs. Pumphrey came to take her dog, she was surprised to see the transformation in health. Tricky jumped into her lap and looked pretty active. Mrs. Pumphrey thanked Mr. Harriet and called it the trump up surgery. So here comes the last part of the story, dear students. What happens when the treatment was over? After a fortnight, the nursery was visited by Mrs. Pumphrey. She came to the nursery to take her dog back. Now, when she entered the nursery, she was noticed by the dog Tricky. Tricky was playing and rolling over there in the garden. He was busy playing with his other members of the gang. He soon started running towards his mistress and came and started giving a hug to Mrs. Pumphrey. Pumphrey could not believe it. Mrs. Pumphrey had never expected such transformation in the health, had never expected such complete recovery, complete regaining of health of his dog. That's why she said, "Thank you, Mr. Harriet." She thanked Mr. Harriet and also told, "This is the trump of the surgery." And from this particular phrase, the title of this particular story has been taken, The Trump of Surgery. I hope you have understood it. Thank you.
Dear students, I hope you have enjoyed today's video. If you have any query, don't forget to write your comment in the comment box. Please do like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Stay home, stay safe.